Since I know it's famous for its hay market, no, the hay tree.
My teacher told me that Dutch people used to live here first, that they were the first inhabitants. I thought that was cool.
Some of the teachers who are alumni of Paramount, they talk about way back when. And yeah, you pick up.
Yeah, they told me that, yeah, it used to be a farm. I was like, wow.
It used to be a big dairy farm, and that it was just a big farm.
I can't picture it like that. Like, nothing seems like that. Even, yeah, like there's buildings everywhere. It's hard to imagine there was a farm.
Well, I always told my children that I never had a bicycle, but I had my own cow. And they thought, your own cow? Yeah, my dad gave me a little calf, and it was born. I used to go feed it, and that was my calf. That's my cow.
The men had to work 7 days a week. They'd get up at 2 o'clock in the morning, milk their cows, go in the house, have some breakfast, clean up, and then they'd sleep for a few hours. 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the same thing again. Had to get up and milk the cows, and that was a 7-day a week job.
Personnel usually got 1 or 2 days off. The owner is never off. He stayed up 24 hours.
Because by that big tree there was a there were dairies there, dairy people there. They all had to bid on their hay and on their cows and everything. That was when the big sales were going on. We had hay trucks all over Hines.
It was the largest hay center in the United States, right underneath that tree that they preserved. You know, and they used to sit under that tree and deal with what they're going to charge for hay. You know, and then there was a sales yard for cattle right next to it, back of it, right back of the church.
And the hay market, of course, was well known because the dairymen came out here to Paramount always, you know, to deal with the hay dealers, you know, and get their hay ordered for their business. You see, it all had to be trucked in, you know.
Oh, in the morning you could go on the hay lot, and there were maybe 10 different hay growers, and they were selling it. So you went by and picked out the hay that you liked, the color of the hay, the taste of the hay.
There was hay lots right across there where the restaurant is. Yeah. That was one of the big ones. And then, of course, Western Consumers had a huge mill here, and they was running trucks out of there about every 30 minutes. And that was a big mill. This Jackson Street was a very, very busy street at that time.
It was a little house, but it had all the indoor plumbing, and it had electric lights, and there was someplace there was a sidewalk where you could roller skate. And these are all luxuries. I'd never had any of that in Holland, you know. And that's how it was with the Dutch people. I mean, they came here to better themselves, and they did better themselves. We became Americans. We were very, very much, as a majority, we all want to be Americans.
We had one sheriff for Paramount, well, for Hines, Clearwater, and Bellflower. Just one officer took care of those two cities. But there was, you'd have thought, you know, with the Depression that there'd have been a lot more crime, but there was so little crime then. We never lost a darn thing.
It smelled very bad. It used to be, if you'd been in LA or so, you'd come close. Oh, you sure smell the dairies. Yes, it was a very, very much of a farm smell.
Yeah. We did have a lot of wide open spaces where I lived on the corner of Boersma and Madison. Right across the street from me was a dairy. Most of the dairymen were Dutch and Portuguese, but this man was Irish, and he had come from Ireland, and he was right across the street, and it was like a McDonald's farm. They had they not only had cows, they had everything, and they tolerated the neighborhood kids going over, and they would let us help them do this, that, and the other thing.
And I sold dairy equipment, and I had an invention for milking cows, and I sold to a Chicago company for $5,000, and that was a lot of money in those days. You could buy a house for that.
Because I think that by the time that I left, there were about 25,000 people here. And when I came here, there were not even 5,000.
So every morning they'd come out and they'd walk the cows, they'd feed them. And then I remember one morning waking up and having the cows in our front yard. Apparently the cows had knocked down the fence and they were walking throughout the neighborhoods. And I remember opening the door and there was one right in my driveway, one in the front lawn. I remember telling my mom, we don't have to go to school today, the cows are in the front yard.
They had electrical business. And the 20s, they started Zamboni Brothers Electric, and Zamboni Brothers, and that was on Paramount Boulevard eventually. They did work in houses and whatnot, just electrical construction, and in the dairies. They serviced the dairy industries a lot. They got to know the dairy people a lot, and then they kind of branched out into refrigeration because they needed to cool the milk. And they got into the block ice business. And let's build some, have some compressors and make an ice plant. So they had an ice plant that was right across the street from what would eventually be the rink, just across from California.
He came out here in '47 and raised $50,000 to buy the property over in Paramount, and it was called Clearwater back in those days. Yeah. And he wanted to get in the drive-in theater business because it was the Hollywood scene out here. Days it was called the Rhodium, and that's named after a chemical because he was a chemist. We changed it, I think it was back in the 70s, and we put up a marquee out in front that said Paramount. And they came up with the idea that we're going to have a swap meet. My dad came up with the name swap meet. This is a meet, like a track meet. You come out and meet and you can swap things. And I remember as a small boy, I was 5, and remember coming out on a Saturday and Sunday, and I'd see a few vendors around the snack bar with everything laid on the ground.
It had to be about 38 or 39 where my dad says, well, you know what, what couldn't we do with this ice plant that we got here, and started looking into an ice rink. They got this land here, the whole block, they bought the whole block, and with Pete Zamboni, who was in construction, Lawrence and my dad, the 3 of them decided to build this rink. And they went together and they formed a partnership and built Iceland. It was open air. There was no roof on it when they installed it in 1940. And I remember skating on it when I was 7 years old, out on the ice, and they'd have canvas during the day with 2x4s holding it up, and I was small enough I skated around, learned how to skate, and had a great time. But then they take the canvas off at night so they keep the wind and the sun off.
They had it every year. And Louis Spanny, who was Dutch, as you probably have heard, he was one of the big pushers for the Hay and Dairy Festival. That was quite a thing.
Those festivals were great. Every Dutchman in a radius of 50, 75 miles, they came here and they had all these games. They had, they call it kuipjesteken.
You hang up a barrel of water, and then they come down from a little higher section in a little cart, you could say, going over rails. And then when you get to the barrel, you're supposed to take a stick to a little hole. And if it hits, you know, or if you miss it, I mean, the barrel would top over, you see, and give you a little refreshment.
Paramount Boulevard wasn't Paramount Boulevard then. It was Ocean Avenue, and it was nothing but a dirt street.
I remember coming into what was then Heinz. There were 3 pool halls, and I don't know how many beer joints, 2 hardware stores, 1 men's clothing store and 1 woman's clothing store. And I'll tell you, on account of the dairy business here, this bank was always mentioned in the papers doing the most business in any bank in Southern California, just on account of the dairy and hay business.
I was born in Clearwater, and I remember that, and we had, we didn't have a farm or rent, but our lots were real big. So we had chickens and we had goats, and we had, I think one time we had a a calf.
You'd be surprised. I mean, there was 6 feed stores here because everybody had their own rabbits, their own chicken, and even their own cow got their own milk.
In 1952, the announcement was made that the Queen and her husband were coming to Paramount.
Queen Juliana came here from the Netherlands and visited officially at the Emmanuel Reformed Church.
Yeah, it was really amazing because the street in front of it was dirt, and we got the city manager of the city to pave that short portion block or so to blacktop, and she came here and she worshiped in our church. Yeah.
But they had these two communities, Hines and Clearwater. They're like the Hatfields and McCoys, shooting at each other across Center Street that later became Olive. And they each had a post office there, and they thought, well, let's get these two cities together.
They had a lot of strange names before they decided on Paramount. They had Tunerville and South Bay and some other silly names.
It was decided to pick Paramount, which was the name of the street that was there already, and that seemed good. And neither town wanted to give up their name. They had to find some other name, but they settled on that, and it was it was a tough campaign to get people. It was a close election, but they finally had an election, and they worked out a agreement with the two postmistresses.
My father at first was opposed to unification, to incorporation. But he could see then finally that Long Beach was going to move down, Southgate was going to move in from, the Hollydale area was Southgate. It was going to move down. Pretty soon you wouldn't have an area of Hines. And so that's when he became convinced that we should incorporate.
Well, I think the reason that the community, unlike all the communities around here, incorporated was to have local control. I think that was the big thing.
And it wasn't until after the war when they started with the big tracts. And some of those was 500 and 600 houses at a time, so it went up real fast.
Well, as the dairies went out, let's see, I'm trying to think of what was over here right behind Progress Park. There was a dairy here, and after the dairy went out, they built these houses over here on Madison, and there used to be a gas station on every corner in Paramount.
The dairy started going out in the 60s, and development came in. Primarily industrial development was taking over the dairies. There was some housing project. Progress Park was a dairy at one time, and that was the Van Dam Dairy. And then the project south of that, the housing project there was built by Ralph Garland, and the first housing track, the new housing track on Topeka Drive.
The dairies were leaving, and there was a lot of blight. As you can imagine, when the dairies move out, the empty corrals, the fencing, and it's just terrible.
The properties became too valuable to have cows on. Maybe an acre would be here $20,000. Well, in China, they could buy acres at $500 an acre, $1,000 an acre. And there was a lot of open field in the Chino area. A lot of them went there. Also, they went to Visalia, farther north, Hanford, that area, to Larry. Right now, there's still quite a few dairy farms out there, big ones. They're most bigger now, much bigger, yes.
It was kind of sad because we had all the Dutch families. We had some nice, very wonderful churches in town, the Emmanuel Reform, the Catholic Church, of course, the Emmanuel, and there's a few others. All of them were doing quite well, but they took the citizens with them. Everybody left. And they were leaving. It was generally a town that was in turmoil and turning over. We just didn't have much going on. To be very honest with you, people were a little sad and everything was slacking off. People were moving away from the city.
But once the dairies were out, then usually that was personnel. Then they moved out, and then they started, the dairies were out, and then usually that was personnel. Then they moved out, and then they started, the dairies were out, and then usually that was personnel. Then they moved out, and then they started, the dairies were out, and then usually that was personnel. Then they moved out, and then they started, the dairies were out, and then usually that was personnel. Then they moved out, started building all over. And Paramount by that time was shooting for industry. And they had quite a bit of industry.
And most of your revenue was generated by liquor stores and your sales tax base. And if you don't have your sales tax base and you don't have funds for law enforcement, for public safety, and then when you don't have that, then the negative aspects of the community really come to life.
I guess the eye-opener was the RAND report, and that came out very early 80s, I'm going to say 80, 81, and it listed the city as one of the 10 worst in the United States.
I'll never forget that. I'm living in Paramount at the time. I'm raising a family. I'm working for the city. It's 1981, and like anyone else, I walk out my front door in my pajamas and pick up the LA Times and open the front page, and there's Paramount, one of the 8th worst disaster suburbs in America, and that's the city you live, work, and are raising a family, and it was just a tragic moment for the city.
They listed us at the economic bottom, one of the most disastrous cities in the whole thing, and so after we hired the new people, we had decided then, and that's a joint council decision, to see if we could upgrade the city, and these people, Bill Holt, Dick Powers, just really took a hold of it, directed us. They had a lot of experience. And within 2-3 years, we were an all-American city. What happened was that the redevelopment had encompassed everything in the city that was not a residence. Ted Mosier was responsible for that, and that council before us, and they did a magnificent job in just outlining the city so that no residents were ever threatened, so you didn't get much in the way of opposition. And then once that was in effect, we were able to we threatened condemnation. We never had to condemn anybody, and we took all that extra money and poured it back into the city to revitalize it in the downtown area and in blighted areas. Essentially, that's what it amounted to.
The town really changed when they tore down the inner city.
Paramount chose to tear down and start over, as you can see by the whole downtown section. That was a big process, and City Fathers had a great vision for the city, and it turned out very well.
Well, the city, was pretty run down, and I wasn't really involved. And but I remember seeing in the papers occasionally and stuff, that the council was talking about redevelopment and changing the look of the city, and there was a lot of scare information out of there from the local press about gangs and problems in our schools and all these types of things. I kind of got involved because of neighborhood issues and started meeting with the local city officials and getting to know the community leaders. And what I found through that was there were so many things to be proud about living in the city of Paramount.
When you're redeveloping a downtown and there are businesses along there, and some of them remember that their father started the business in that store and wanted some kind of a legacy for him. And the whole history of people's lives gets wrapped up into it.
You've cleaned it up. Now you go through Paramount, you got this wonderful little area with the fake cows in there. That wonderful big tree is still over there.
A month ago, we named Frank Zamboni Elementary School. And it was nice to have the Zambonis speak with us and share their memories.
Businesses are wanting to come to Paramount.
Well, look at our Starbucks. They used to say that our Starbucks that it wasn't even going to make it. There wasn't the right clientele here, and it's one of the most successful in the county.
And they're always telling us, your city, above every other city we've been to around, has kind of this hometown feel. I feel like I'm in a little small town. And although we are relatively small, still most communities, in the Los Angeles basin don't retain that kind of attitude.
If you were to ask me what are the big accomplishments or what are the biggest things that come here in Paramount would be, I would say that the education now, that these kids are now going into education and they're going to college and they're staying here.
I was born at Suburban Medical Center 22 years ago.
I'm currently a senior at USC. I'm a major in public policy and management, and I'm hoping to go on to graduate school and get my MBA.
I really like Paramount, and if you live in it, you get to see like what a good city it is, because a lot of people look down on Paramount, but it's not like that anymore, and it's a good city to live in.
Paramount went through a transition period, and I think just being able to be a part of that, being able to see, I grew up in what we call the Sands, and so, for a long time it was kind of a blighted area. It was very negative, and just as time has gone by, I mean, the amount of beautification, the amount of, the lowering of crime rates and stuff like that, and just seeing it, not just hearing about it and reading about it, but actually seeing it, I think it's probably been the most special part for me, because a lot of times people don't know where Paramount is, they don't know what it's about, and they just refer to it as kind of, oh, Paramount. They kind of open their eyes, but when they come here, even friends that grew up in Lakewood, they come to Paramount now, and they're kind of like, wow, this is cool.
We're in a particular area in Los Angeles County where you get a little bit of taste of every culture. It's kind of worldly. You get to know a little bit of everybody, and you're not closeted from the world.
I think it's going in the right direction, and I hope that I can continue to kind of, stick around and see what it holds.